So let me just quickly introduce the panel. They are at least well known to most of you here. Immediately to my right, Jamal Abdi is the president of NIAC, the National Iranian American Council. To his right, Dr. Layla Austin, executive director over at PAYA, Public Affairs Alliance of Iranian Americans. And to her right, we have Paris Etamadi Scott, who is the managing attorney of the San Jose Center for Parse Equality Center. These organizations all represent large swaths of Iranian Americans in this country, albeit from completely different perspectives for the most part. So part of the interesting discussion here will be to get into those differences and what those differences mean in terms of what the organizations can do and how they can support the community going forward. Okay, so let's get into a little bit. Oh, and I guess me. You guys know, right? I'm the now the National President Emeritus of the Iranian American Bar Association, and my successor in interest was just up here, the current president, Ramin. Okay, let's start. We want to start with some basic stuff, which is what challenges we see for the future of our community. We've talked about one clearly, and that's immigration, right? So I know we've sort of hit this drum a few times today already, but we were hoping to not just discuss where we are, which is what the last panel was talking about, but where we foresee this issue going forward. And so obviously one of the major challenges facing the community is immigration. And fortunately, we have somebody up here who's actually an immigration practitioner. And you know, it started, you guys have heard about CARP, you probably know about HR 158, and then now we have the travel ban, the refugee ban. So there are quite a few challenges from the immigration perspective facing our community. We heard about some of those from the prior panel. And I wanted to ask the panel, in as much as they have the experience, and I'm happy to weigh in, but what do we see? Let's start with the basics, the future of the travel ban. If you guys have any thoughts on where it is, and of course it's not in a vacuum. The travel ban is going to be tied to politics, sadly enough, because it will largely depend on who is and isn't president. And so I would just like to get your thoughts on where we think this is going. Is it going to be expanded or limited? Is it going to be the same? Is it going to be eliminated? And what effects of the upcoming election will be on it? And what means we have to challenge it in our best case and worst case scenarios. So who wants to get started on this?
For immigration.
Yeah.
Travel ban is not immigration law. So I completely, when immigration attorneys say I do travel ban waivers, then they don't know what they're talking about. I do them, but they just don't exist because waivers are a sham. Just wanted to mention that there are proper waivers in immigration law, and the travel ban waiver is not one of them. But you know, I think it's clear that if this president gets reelected, the travel ban is likely to stay. In fact, there was a report, I think on October 30th, that he's considering to add more countries to the list of banned countries on the travel ban. And what they said is that adding countries that are not compliant with electronic documents and information sharing. So apparently there are about 5 countries that are going to be added. So this is basically, if this president gets reelected, we're likely to see the ban remain in force and also more countries added to it. This is my opinion.
So we actually, I think, as most of you know, we do actually also talk to both sides of the aisle on the Hill. And what we are hearing, and I think Elika, actually Elika Eftahari, there's two Elikas here today, you mentioned as well, you'd be surprised at how many members of Congress on both sides of the aisle are not really that supportive of the travel ban. So it is something that's actually coming from the White House. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, if Trump is reelected, I think it's not going to go anywhere, at least for another 4 years. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes when he is no longer elected, hopefully. But, the other thing is that, but we do have to be careful because we do have these laws now that are being upheld by the Supreme Court. So we work very hard on, with a coalition, a larger coalition, and Jamal can talk about that as well. That includes the ACLU and NILC and other organizations on legislation and making sure that, I don't know if you've heard of the No Ban Act, making sure that the language of the No Ban Act, which is a piece of legislation that's going to hopefully repeal the travel ban, that's one of the goals. The other is to make sure it never can happen again, so that that language is there so that in future administrations, we do not, there's, again, I'm not a lawyer, but there's some element of strict scrutiny in it, so, so that the Supreme Court can actually take that into account. I also want to say that I thought it was really cool that Yegane here talked about the revealing the sham, and it really does go full circle because we helped as advocacy organization reveal the sham by writing a letter to the State Department and also having a bipartisan two senators, one from each side, Senator Van Hollen and Senator Flake, write a letter to the State Department to follow up on what exactly happened with the implementation of the waivers, and that led to the sham, as we call it, being revealed. So I think it's really cool that we're seeing, at these meetings, we're seeing these kinds of loops getting closed. I thought that was, anyway, just go ahead.
So, actually, I just want to start by saying, I don't want to say it's an honor, that's so cliche, but how moving it is to be in a room with institution builders for the Iranian American community. And Babak's eloquent speech really hit the nail on the head about, I think, what we're all here to do. We're all here to build a civil society of Iranian Americans. And it doesn't matter what issue we're talking about. I think that maybe some of the discourse in our community that gets tense and sensitive comes from a lack of understanding about what organizations like ours are here to do. We're here to operate in the American political system, to have an impact on the policies of our government. And this is now a government that is banning our families from this country. If my family members can't come and visit me in this country, that means I'm not free. That means my rights are being undermined. And an organization like NIAC, just like PAIA, like PARS, like IABA, we are here to affect those policies so that we have our rights. So when asked about the future of the travel ban, I mean, I think that there are the tactical day-to-day issues. So there's, the work we're doing on legislation, the political work, so that we can, look, we're nonpartisan, but Donald Trump has got to go. And I think it's very in vogue right now for people to say, oh, I think Donald Trump's going to win in 2020. It's like, well, you're not a historian. Do something about it. We're not, 2020 is in the future. It's not the past. So if you think Donald Trump's going to win, go knock on doors. Go raise money for candidates. Go get involved with a political organization. Do something about it. But the travel ban, even if it gets repealed, even if a Democratic administration comes in and they actually repeal it, it's a symptom of a bigger issue. It's a symptom of a bigger set of issues. The breakdown of our institutions in this country. The fact that it's not just Congress, it's not just the presidency, even the Supreme Court is dysfunctional now. We have seats being stolen for by a political party that has gone off the deep end, and that, in the words of Norm Ornstein from American Enterprise Institute, is a radical insurgency that is so committed to an ideology and so committed to delegitimizing its political opponents, they've hijacked the country. I think we got to be real about that. But as far as the future of the travel ban, it's going to come down to how are we addressing those symptoms of the issue. We need more civic engagement. We need more. There are 100 million Americans who didn't vote in 2016. 100 million people. If we want to fix the travel ban, if we want to fix any issue that affects our community, we have to be willing to engage in those issues and deal with the root causes of these things. And I think for the future of Iranian Americans is a lot like the future for everybody. We're dealing with an existential challenge of climate change. It's an existential challenge, just like nuclear weapons is an existential challenge, and fighting proliferation needs to be something that we commit ourselves to. We see how issues like climate change are going to exacerbate the issue of refugees and human migration. Refugees is what led to H.R. 158. This is what gave the political power to Donald Trump on the campaign trail to advocate for H.R. 158. And Democrats caved on it. They didn't like it, but they signed off on it. Obama signed it. And everybody said, okay, that's the compromise to make it so that Donald Trump doesn't ban refugees from this country. Well, then he gets elected. Not only does he ban refugees, but he uses the list from H.R. 158 to ban all of our family members. So if we look at the travel ban as just an issue for our community, we're missing the fact that, well, this is tied to the refugee issue. The refugee issue is tied to U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. And I think what is I'll say again, such an honor to be an Iranian American is that we are uniquely situated. We are like the canaries in the coal mine, where these deep existential issues for our country, for our species, we are actually at the center of. We're at the center of xenophobia and Islamophobia. We're at the center of the U.S. role in the world and the failures of liberal hegemony. And we're at the center of ethno-nationalism, which is an American phenomenon, but it's also a global phenomenon. So I think that as Iranian Americans, as we think about the future, building institutions, getting our community engaged, because we are at the center of all these issues, and we have so many resources and so much talent to be able to confront them, and not just resolve these issues for ourselves, but to resolve them to give a gift to this country that we now call home, and to this world where we can actually, not just end the travel ban, but try to attack all of these issues that are so threatening in the future. And I think we have a unique obligation and opportunity to do that.
Thank you, guys. And speaking of unique perspectives, I would like Paris to share hers. One of the questions is, how is the travel ban, if you were thinking more big term, how is it affecting, how not just forget the travel ban, how are the current immigration policies, more largely, if you're looking at the big picture, how is that going to affect our community? And I thought you had a lovely perspective to share with us.
So the subject is, what is the future for the Iranian American community? And we were discussing this among us, and I sort of said, I think if the path we're on, this community is going to become an exclusive club of dwindling numbers. And the reason why I'm saying this, basically three reasons. One is the infamous travel ban. If you want to hear numbers, in 2017, 6,643 immigrant visas were granted to individuals born in Iran. In 2018, that number went down to 537 in 12 months following the travel ban, and that's a 92% decrease. And then the cap on refugees. So first there was a refugee ban, then it became a cap on refugees and extreme vetting of refugees from certain countries. So in 2017, the cap was reduced to 50,000, but still 2,577 Iranian refugees were resettled in the United States. In 2018, only 41 Iranian refugees were resettled in the United States. The third reason why I think we're heading toward this exclusive club of dwindling numbers is the extreme vetting policies of this administration for Iranians who are currently in the United States. So whether they're filing to become an asylee or they're adjusting their status, they're getting an F1 student visa converted to an H1B, they're applying to become a naturalized U.S. citizen. They're lawful permanent residents, but they want to become a U.S. citizen. They are hurdles now. There are extra hurdles for these particular Iranian nationals. And we see it as immigration practitioners. There's nothing out there. It's not as sexy as travel ban, 1.0, 2.0. It's very subtle. but it happens every day at USCIS field offices when they go for interviews, when immigration practitioners represent them at their interviews. They are seeing extreme questioning, unreasonable and capricious requests for evidence, for things that are not related to the relief they're seeking. Naturalization applicants, these are lawful permanent residents who have lived here for at least 5 years, and now when we go to their interviews, we hear questions about their past, maybe 30, 40 years ago when they lived in Iran, whether they were involved with the oil industry, whether their family was involved with the oil industry, whether they ever had any relations with anybody who was in the government. Old Iranian seniors who go for their interview, they're asked to produce their military card, even if they've done their military during the Shah era and they've lost their card. They don't grant them their, let's say, citizenship until they produce that card from somewhere. So these are just things that we see happening, but it's not in the media. Nobody's writing a report on it, but it's happening, and we see it as immigration practitioners. And all these factors give hand to say that this is becoming a very exclusive club if we don't take action, if we don't stand up and fight and be an activist and make our voices heard. And this is what this panel is about, future. Let's build coalitions. Let's come together, put our differences aside, and try to make our club inclusive and thrive.
Yeah, I just wanted to add some numbers since Bobak Houri, by the way, is the first ED of PAYA, and I only walk in his footsteps, but he did mention our survey. We do a survey of Iranian Americans every year. I have a couple of hard copies, but it is available on our website if you're interested. And that survey basically, it says that 93% of Iranian Americans have family in Iran. So we are indelibly linked with Iran, and all our issues are coming. 93%. 70% say they have been personally affected by the travel ban. That's a pretty huge number. So I think that this, and I couldn't agree more, that this enabled environment of discrimination. We also have been in touch with students. I think a lot of you are familiar with the fact that some students have been turned back. They are officially exempt from the ban, but they've recently been turned back and their visas have been revoked. And a couple of them who made it to Logan Airport in Boston and were turned back are also getting that kind of questioning, like completely ridiculous things like, do you like blonde women? And that kind of questioning, which really is a sign of this enabled environment of discrimination. So just wanted to add that.
And by the way, this won't all be down, right? We're going to talk about some solutions in a second. But there is no way to talk about the challenges facing our community without, to some extent at least, acknowledging the elephant in the room. And that has always been, or at least for me since leaving Iran in 1984, the politics of sanctions and the threat of war. And how does that affect people here, frankly, right? I mean, we know how it affects, if you guys have family in Iran, you know how it affects them. But the question is, how does the politics of sanctions and the politics of war and diplomacy affect Iranian Americans here in the US? And what can we expect going forward? Jamal, you want to take a crack at this?
So the politics of sanctions and the politics of war. So for years, we have been talking about the risk of an accidental conflict in the Persian Gulf, that there are so many tripwires where you don't, because, there's a lot of conversation about intention. The U.S. doesn't want war with Iran. No, Iran doesn't want war. And we've said it doesn't matter. You've got all of the circumstances lined up where you could have an accidental conflagration really easily with just one misstep. Well, in the past 6 months, we've seen a lot of very reckless and dangerous actions in the Persian Gulf. And And somehow we've avoided war. You know, first we're going to figure out the microphone situation, then we're going to prevent war and lift the travel ban. My big fear, especially after Trump got elected, but coming into this year, was that there was going to be a push for war with Iran, and that Iranian Americans were going to be identified as endorsing that proposition. And that, look, the organizations on the side that maybe favor a US-led regime change are very well organized, they're very well funded. The Mujahideen they're at every single congressional hearing. They have relationships with, I think, more lawmakers than any of the other organizations working on this issue, and they're impactful. And so, all that being said, we didn't get a war. You know, somebody blew up Saudi Aramco's facilities, and the U.S. didn't strike back. Iran downed a U.S. drone, and Donald Trump came within 10 minutes and pulled back. And I think that what we're dealing with here is that, you know, this is a president who doesn't necessarily want a war, but this is also a very craven person who I really think if the politics line up, he would be fine with confronting Iran and triggering a war next year if he believed that that was going to be beneficial for his election campaign. And I similarly think that the Iranians, if they think that taking some reckless actions against the United States would undermine Donald Trump in the election or undermine whoever would have some impact, I'm sure that they're considering those things as well, and clearly they don't have a lot to lose because they're engaging in these really, really reckless actions. On the sanctions side of things, this is really, I mean, this is something that we should all be united on. No matter how you think the regime should be dealt with, you should, I think, morally oppose the notion of collective punishment of an entire population and stand against taking away medicine and food from children and, you know, taking away medicine from cancer patients. This is the deliberate policy of the United States government right now, and this is a new phenomenon. Prior to this, you know, Obama did smart sanctions, then he did broad sanctions. He sanctioned the entire Iranian economy, but there were measures in place that, at least on their face, and this was discussed at one of the earlier panels, exempted humanitarian trade. And that has been the policy of successive administrations, Trump administration as well, exemptions for humanitarian goods. Those exemptions, in practice, were pretty ineffective because of the lack of financial channels, the unwillingness of banks and private entities to engage in that kind of trade, because, you know, unfortunately, medicine is a for-profit industry. It's not a charity. But until recently, this has been the policy of the United States. A couple weeks ago, the Donald Trump administration designated the Central Bank of Iran under terrorism sanctions. The CBI is now an SDGT, and there is no humanitarian exemption for those sanctions. So now, if you are dealing with Iran, if you are a pharmaceutical company trying to sell medicine to Iran, in order to pay for that medicine, the CBI has to provide the funds for that, and those funds are now sanctioned. So, and this is a deliberate policy. This is not an accident. A couple weeks later, Treasury rolled out their package of how you can actually engage in humanitarian trade with Iran, and it's full of, you know, onerous requirements that, to me, look like designed to prevent anybody from engaging in that kind of trade. And that's because I think maximum pressure is very much designed at crippling Iranian society, punishing ordinary people, turning it into a failed state, in this hope that the people are going to rise up and take out the government, and then who knows what happens next. So I think things are going in a very bad direction. For Iranian Americans, I think the thing we can talk about most is the impact of the sanctions. The people we know. I mean, everybody, I think, you know, I have a cousin who can't get her ear implant, and she's, you know, she's 10 and she's going to be deaf until that can happen. And she's had one, now she can't get one. You hear these stories across the board. And there's not the attention in Congress, the administration, the public, about what our government is doing to these people and how we need to arrest this decline. So I think things are getting bad, they're getting worse. I don't see a breakthrough necessarily on the horizon. But I think there's a lot more we can do to actually try to trigger such a breakthrough.
Anybody else want to add to that? Okay, so So those are some of the challenges facing us, and when you're talking about sanctions, you're obviously, again, the impact of it is going to be felt in Iran more significantly, but it is impacting Iranian Americans, right? It's our family members that have cancer and can't get medicine. It's our family members that can't get implants. And so the question now is, right, and we can be honest about this, right? Some of this we know we will have little to no impact on, but some of this we can have much greater impact on, and it depends on our ability as a community to unite on shared goals that most or almost all of us share. So let's talk about the path forward. And on that front, let's talk about civic engagement. Layla, you want to tell us the significance of civic engagement?
Sure.
And what forms of it?
This is not a civics class. Thank you all for being here this late, so I'm going to try and not bore you. But yeah, I mean, I think that we do all, as Iranian Americans, share a common goal. We all want to influence public policy in a way that benefits our community. And I think that one of the things that is lacking in our community for a variety of reasons, and I think Ali, right, who was up here before us, also mentioned a reluctance in the community for, I think he said cultural reasons or historical reasons. But I think the biggest challenge for us right now is to sort of make space for the very diverse community that we have, such that every person, regardless of their opinions, has an authentic way to engage. And it doesn't have to be any kind of formal affiliation. So one of the things that we are really focused on at PAYA is to create that sort of safe space, nonpartisan safe space, so that everyone can engage in a way that, again, is meaningful to them, whether it's climate justice or, whatever. I think that's the first stepping stone that we really need to kind of meet before we can have any kind of influence. We all know I'm an immigrant. I came here to go to college, and we all know that we are a very hardworking community, and we're highly assimilative. I was just actually thinking right on this panel. I think you also married a non-Iranian, given your last name. So both of us married a non-Iranian, and Jamal is the product of a mixed marriage. So this is how assimilated we are, right? So, and even though we're so assimilated, so hard, so successful, and contribute on so many levels to American society, we are not able to deal with the discrimination that is really facing us. So it's very important, I think, to be engaged, to participate in politics, to participate in the democratic process. So what we've seen, do you want me to go into the voting and political participation, or?
Yeah, I mean, we can, and this is probably where it's going to be more of a bit of a round table. But yeah, I mean, so we have the forms of civic engagement.
Yeah,
so
interestingly, I mean, I think this is obviously very uncertain times. These are times highly polarized politically, and times that are anti-immigrant, anti-diplomacy, and really kind of fanning the flames of identity politics, which is not good for our community at all. But it's also in a way a fragile yet fertile time for Iranian Americans to really get together and build this common voice that we're talking about. And one thing that we do see in our current survey, we actually asked, we asked Iranian Americans what their main goal for their community's civic and advocacy organization would be, and the top choice was getting Iranian American participation in US politics. So there's a real desire for building power and influence currently. So what we want to do is sort of harness that energy and move forward. Since Babak mentioned IAPAC, that's the affiliated PAC of PAYA that actually precedes the organization, when it first started, there were only 2 Iranian Americans who wanted to run for public office of any kind. Local, state, federal at that time. And now in the 2018 cycle, we personally, the organization supported 9 Iranian Americans, and 3 of them won historic elections. 3 women became the first state senators in their states: Anna Kaplan in New York, Anna Eskamani in Florida, and Zahra Karenchak in Georgia. So that's a huge, huge path forward, I think. And the PAC itself, I just want to put in a plug because I'm really, it's a great thing, and I think I should share this as a path forward. In the 2018 election cycle, we managed to raise and also help raise the PAC itself and help raise $1 million for champions of our causes, and I think that's not too shabby for an ethnic PAC. So thanks to all of you. So that's kind of where we are. I think the 2020 cycle is going to be even more exciting. We have 3 viable candidates for Congress. All women again, running for Congress, and I am almost positive that at least one of them will make it and will be the first Iranian American member of Congress. That would be another huge plus for us. So that's we're going in the right direction. Voting also has been dismal in voter registration. We have numbers from the DCCC. Morad gave me all these things, so I'm going to focus on it. Where I think in 2014, we had a congressional race in LA. Was it Gilani? Lili Gilani, I think, ran. And that was basically, this is the largest, the highest density Iranian American population anywhere. And the DCCC basically said that only 7,000 people were registered to vote. That's pretty bad, right? And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kia Hamadanchi's race in Orange County. That also estimates, again, we are not very well counted. We can talk about the census in a second. There's no real count of our community. But there were like 60, I think the estimates are 60,000. Am I right? This is your county. 60,000 Iranian Americans here? Is that the estimate? No? In Orange County?
Well, it's like 20,000 in that Irvine district.
In that district,
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, again, he did focus mainly on Iranian Americans. He anecdotally, we know that voter turnout was very low and that he received like just over 3,000 votes. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that we are also working on.
Excellent. Okay, so we talk about civic engagement. Obviously, we talk about getting actively involved in joining the system in some way, right? So you're either voting, you're being active in selecting your elected officials from a local all the way to a national level, or you're actually becoming one of the candidates for those positions. But there are sort of other forms of civic engagement. Obviously, one of them, which is sort of at the core, it's really a foundational issue, is that you just talked about, Leila, is the census, right? I mean, in American politics, knowing how many of you there are is foundational to demonstrating the influence you have with your elected officials, because your numbers typically reflect the number of votes, which then reflect your influence in that area. Setting aside that we do have a fairly dismal voting record, we don't actually know how many of us there are, and the census is let's say, woefully undercounted in that regard. So, Paris, you want to tell us a little bit about efforts to change that?
Sure. As part of a nonprofit organization, we have applied for local grants and county grants, as well as state grants, California grants, to partake in census. So with the funding we've received, PARS is now a questionnaire assistance center in Northern and Southern California, where we help the community with the questions they may have about the census. That's one of the things we do. We do Know Your Rights and outreach to let the community know what census means. We have produced materials in both languages, Farsi and English and Spanish, because our grant actually extends to all immigrants, predominantly the hard-to-reach Iranian American community, Persian-speaking, Dari-speaking communities, but all immigrants, because that's part of our deliverables. And we're actively engaged in the census, Know Your Rights, and canvassing will start as well next year. We are a local organization, Northern and Southern California, so we don't want our efforts to go to waste because we believe that the entire community needs to be aware of this, and that's why we're in talks with PAYA, hopefully NIAC soon, and other Iranian American organizations to expand what we do and leverage each other's strengths and connections to be able to engage people in this very important activity. This is imminent. April 1st, 2020 is the Census Day, and we need the community to be aware of this and to take part in it. And anybody in this room, if they have any ideas, if you're local in California, please contact us and let us know where you think we should go to talk about this, to do a door-to-door, person-to-person. Any event that you think would help educate the community, please reach out to PARS. Maybe Paya can talk, but certainly to PARS, please reach out and let us know. And that's how a coalition is built. That's how collaboration happens.
Layla, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I do want to add for anyone who might be at all worried about filling out the census, because I know these are hard times and some people like to be anonymous, that it is fully anonymous. So reassure everyone that nobody's going to know who you are if you fill it out. Just to give a little bit more context, in 2000, that census is decennial. It happens every 10 years. So it's important for us to really participate. In 2010, PAYA helped launch a Iranians Count campaign that I think had 65 organizations that got together and did a writing campaign, writing in Iranian American, or some of you may have done that or remember it from 10 years ago. And that led to the census realizing that our community, and including other ethnic communities, as Paris was saying, they don't necessarily, the categories in the census don't relate to them. And there's nowhere for us to really mark our ethnicity. That led to 10 years of work on the MENA category, Middle East and North Africa category, that literally just a few months ago got nixed by the Trump administration. But there is hope because the new census, this just got actually finalized yesterday, so I know this for a fact. The form basically allows you, there's 5 or 6 race categories and an other category for race, and they have a write-in box under each race category. And wherever you put Iranian, if you're mixed race and want to put it under white and Asian or whatever, it will get tabulated. And that will definitely give us a more accurate count, and it's fully anonymous. So just wanted to put that plug in.
Okay, so thank you for the plug. Okay, so we've talked about what individuals are doing. I think it's also now helpful to talk about organizations and the tools at their disposal. And the interesting is up here, I think we cover, in terms of organizations and their missions, a large part of the panoply of tools available to organizations, right? So when you think what can organizations do, you're thinking typically community service or direct services, which are sort of go hand in hand. You're talking about advocacy, you're talking about lobbying, and you're talking about impact litigation. And so fortunately, everybody up here can speak to one of those issues. So why don't we start with advocacy and lobbying, and I know that both Layla and Jamal can speak to this, but why don't we start with Jamal, because it's your turn to speak, and talk to us about the space and the use of advocacy and lobbying in furthering the interests of the community. And then Layla, you can also weigh in on that. Oh, and also, let's keep it to like a couple minutes.
All right, set the timer.
After he says Layla, he's like,
Well, look, so the way that we're structured, we have our staff in DC that does direct lobbying with members of Congress and with the administration. And then we have chapters all around the country of mostly Iranian Americans, but then other allies, allied organizations like J Street, other, non-Iranians for whatever reason have become enamored with the Iranian experience, and so want to join with us and advocate on the issues that we advocate on. And the really important thing here is it's institution building. It's about building this infrastructure. For me, my motivation is, when I was on the Hill, so AIPAC, the main, pro-Israel lobby, every single member of the House and the Senate has at least one person who is a political donor who has a direct relationship with that elected official. And when they come to the office, the chief of staff pulls the foreign policy person aside, especially if he happens to be Iranian American, and says, you got to roll out the red carpet for this person. Whatever she says, you bring it right to us, because this is a very important person. The subtext is she, hosted a fundraiser that raised, $50,000 here or there. And so they have that infrastructure that covers the entirety of Capitol Hill. That's just one element of influence, but that's sort of where I would like to get. Now, I don't think we have a large enough population per se that we're going to have a relationship with every single member of Congress, but that's where your allies come in. That's where other organizations that do similar work, but for different types of communities, that's where they can fill in. You have a coalition of organizations. So around the Iran deal, we were doing in-district meetings and doing those types of things. And then the other piece of it, election campaign finance is such BS. It's a total quid pro quo, but whatever. I didn't say that. But yeah, so there's IAPAC, NIAC Action. We just formed a PAC. We endorsed the past 2 elections. This is critical. Unfortunately, this is what lawmakers spend more of their time doing than anything, is raising money. And so if you want access, if you want influence, it helps to be a part of an organization that is raising money for a cause. And I think in this community, we spend a lot of money, actually. If you look at the FEC information, Iranian Americans spend millions of dollars every election. But a lot of that, and it's actually, 1 million is amazing. Like, that's influence. It's so important that this is done on an organized basis. So if a group of Iranian Americans donate money to a campaign, those are just individual people, and it doesn't really, it's just, okay, I have to make sure to give this person a call, this person to call, this person to call, and kind of pretend I'm their friend, and if they want me to vote on an issue, I'll take it into special consideration. If you have a group of Iranian Americans that are part of an organized group, part of a political action committee, and they're giving, the message is, we are giving to you because we support diplomacy, because we oppose sanctions, because we support civil rights and fair immigration. And it's actually around that issue. And so this is the basis for political power. It's organized people, organized money. And so institutions like ours are here to organize those facets of our community so that we can have the political power to advocate on the issues that matter to us.
Leila John, do you want to weigh in?
I'll do 30 seconds since I've been talking too much. You'll be proud of me. No, I've been talking too much. Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I do want to say that we have to be in it for the long run. It's a long run. It's a long-term game, having influence. So, we at PAIA work very hard on our relationships with members of Congress. It's important that they know who we are. We work, as I said, on both sides of the aisle. So even if they don't champion our causes directly, if they have influence over our causes, we do go in and we tell them, and they listen. They do listen. So it's just there's patience. I think we're working in the right direction, and we should just continue. That's it.
Okay, so there we're talking about lobbying, direct lobbying, advocacy. So the key there, obviously, as with anything else, organization, actually having a cohesive group with some shared goals that you are joining on, advocating, and getting before your elected officials. So that's one method that organizations, going forward, and we're going to talk about collaboration a little bit, but going forward, that's one method that organizations can continue to advance the causes of the Iranian American community. But there's another one, and those are direct services and community services, which are usually dealing with individuals impacted by the policies. So why don't we have Paris talk to us a little bit about that?
Pars Equality Center, I think, believes that charity begins from home, at home. So we know there are problems and there are issues with the sanctions and the war, and we're so happy that you guys are here to think about that and get those issues sorted, hopefully. But we have an immediate need in our community who are poor, homeless, and there are many, who need basic social services, who need training to get a job, mentorship, ESL skills, because they don't speak English that well, how to write a resume, how to be coached through an interview process. They don't know that. So there is a need in our community, and the real is present, and it's not something in the future. There has been a need for many, many years. Unfortunately, not many organizations are out there to address those needs. And so this is where we fit in as part of a puzzle. So they're on the national level. We're more on the grassroots level, trying to help people with community services and direct legal representation on immigration issues only. Unfortunately, we don't have a family lawyer. We only have immigration attorneys at PARS. But we provide either free or low-cost immigration legal representation for all sorts of different cases. And that's how we can build our community, strengthen our community, so that they have the time to think about, oh, maybe I should go and register to vote, or maybe now that I have a job and I have a roof over my head, I can think about taking part in the census. So if they don't have the basics, they won't go and vote because they don't care about that. They need a roof over their head and food on the table, and that's why we try to address this to the best of our abilities.
Thank you. And obviously, so we've talked about advocacy and lobbying and community service. The other obvious, and this should be obvious to most of you in the room, avenue available to organizations is litigation, right, and specifically impact litigation. These four orgs were all involved together in challenging the first versions of the travel ban that were ultimately upheld. We continue to obviously work with each other. We're in coalition build, but we have IABA, along with Elika spoke to this, we have current litigation in the Northern District of California challenging the waiver provisions of the travel ban. PARS, for example, is actually an organizational plaintiff in that case. So impact litigation has its place. It's the type of litigation where, the reason it's called impact litigation is because you choose your cases carefully and you want to select the one that's going to have the largest impact. It's actually going to change the law, or that's going to change the minds of the people who have the ability to change the law. And so that's obviously another tool available to us. IABA takes advantage of that frequently, but and this sort of really bleeds perfectly into the next topic. We do that effectively because we coalition build, right? IABA is full of lawyers, true, but that also means that we're full of lawyers who are actually lawyers by day, right? And so we don't spend our days litigating on behalf of, say, travel ban clients, right? Because we just don't have that capacity. In order to be able to do that, we have to coalition build, and we have to collaborate. It's true that PARS has immigration attorneys only, but there's collaboration opportunities there, right? They can collaborate with IABA to get family attorneys over there, or to have, say, clinics for employment law or whatever, which we've actually done in the past. So this brings us to the critical topic of collaboration and how we as organizations can collaborate to impact the community and its interests. And we're about 5 minutes out, so why don't we just start with Jamal and go straight down. What can we do? Everyone take a minute and a half, 2 minutes most. What can we do to collaborate better? And how can we use that collaboration within our community, amongst ourselves, and externally to impact our community?
This is the big question.
This is the big question.
Do you have the answer?
This is me buying time.
We can start
Run down the clock. Well, look, I think the key to collaboration is going to be, it's actually going to come from the bottom up to some degree. And I think that for the constituents of our organizations, I think it's really important that you weigh in with us and demand collaboration. If we do something on our own, when I hear people say, well, why is IABA and PIA and PARS not on this? And I think that it's important that we hear those things, like we're membership organizations. That's how we make our decisions. And, the other elephant in the room is that NIAC has plenty of haters. A lot of people who think we're like an opposition group or something that is supporting the Islamic Republic, which the notion, meet some of our staff and reconcile that with the idea of us supporting a theocracy. It's pretty mind-blowing. But those people are really loud, and we need some of the radical moderates to step up and, if you believe in what we're doing, please, you don't need to go out and scream in the streets or anything like that, but we got to hear from you. We got to hear the positive feedback as well, and I think that goes for all of us. The work that we do, it can feel pretty lonely, and we're only as strong as our supporters and the willingness of you all to speak up. And a lot of people come to me and they're like, I support NIAC, but don't tell anybody. And I'm like, well, that's okay. Thank you for that. But so yeah, if you can say that a little bit louder, that's much appreciated. I don't know. So that's as good as I can do. I think we probably need to talk about it ourselves as well.
I agree. I think that, well, first of all, unfortunately, in this environment, there is plenty of hate to spread, so we receive quite a bit of it as well. Unfortunately, as I said, it's enabled a lot of the, I don't know what to call them, radical, non-radical, moderate elements out there. But I think actually, I kind of take a different perspective. I think that for a community to have organizations that focus on different ways on our common goal is actually kind of a privilege. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with it. I don't think we have to absolutely collaborate all the time. We sometimes can't. I think Jamal and I are aware of that. I now told you 4 times that we work on both sides of the aisle. So for us to put our name on a statement that has code pink on it is just not, that'll kill our relationships with a certain side of the government. And I know DC people understand that. Not that I personally have anything against code pink, but I just can't put Paya's name on that because then certain doors will close for me for the type of work that I do. But how great is it that you all have organizations that work on different ends and work for you, for the, the common good of the, so I don't know that we collaborate when it works, when it's strategic, and sometimes we just each push our own path where we have strengths. But it's all for the common good and that's how I see it. Maybe I'm being, is that okay?
Yeah. I totally agree with Leila. We have, as I mentioned, we complement each other, and PARS is a community-based organization. It's not an advocacy organization, even though I advocate on behalf of my clients and go to the congressional representative. But as an organization, we are a community-based organization, having a senior club and helping the 60-year-olds do yoga and meditation. So we are complementary, and I think there are areas where we can collaborate, like the travel ban litigation, like the census. But it doesn't mean that on everything, because we're just different types of organizations. And that's how best to look at this. It's a divide and conquer, and moving forward as civilly as possible.
Yeah, sure. I was going to, you go ahead.
Well, so, one idea that comes to mind. I think what we really need in this community, this is a phenomenon, this is a national and international phenomenon, but we do not have a channel for a civic discourse and where we can actually disagree with each other and not destroy one another. I think, the Persian language media doesn't often offer that opportunity. And I think as organizations, we can think about how do we create a forum where we can actually debate these issues. There are real debates to be had that don't mean you are, a warmonger or, Jumhuri Islami or whatever, we should be able to talk about those things. And I think that we have seen how not having that ability to have a discourse, what that means for our country. I'll say, for me politically, before Donald Trump, it was like slash and burn. It was like, you got to beat the other side. You got to, defeat them and do what it takes. And now we see where that leads. It's a race to the bottom. Eventually, the person with the least scruples is going to end up winning that contest. So how do we figure out how to actually have a discourse where we can disagree with each other and debate and actually get the best ideas out of the community? And then, you know what? Then we can work in separate directions, but at least there is some level of connectivity to be able to forge a path forward where we are together and we are organized and we can work on the things where we actually agree with one another.
Excellent. Well, first of all, I can't agree more. Just to remind everybody, right, Iranian Americans are a diverse group. We should know that. And it's the diversities you're aware of, either between faith or educational levels, but also between socioeconomic class. I mean, like, we hear the statistic always, oh, we're one of the most successful minorities in the country. But you talk to Paris and you'll find out we don't have like any lack of homeless people or people lower down the socio. So there is actual diversity here. And so to borrow sort of an idea from Elika, who basically did this amazing convening to get these ideas out, I think there's a difference. You don't want to confuse unity with uniformity, right? We can unite behind certain things. We can have civil discourse. We can agree in a civilized manner to disagree with each other and still identify areas where we can work with each other. We can unite over certain shared principles and not acknowledge and not have to immediately say, oh, we're all uniform. We're all going to conform to one set of ideas, right? No, we don't expect that of any other community. It would be irrational to expect it of this one. But collaboration will have to be at the bottom, at the foundation of anything that we do, right? I mean, I think one thing that we quickly learned when HR 158 rolled around was that we were exactly what Jamal is describing, highly divided and unable to work with each other. I'm not saying that much of that has been fixed, but one thing that has been fixed because of the Trump presidency is an ability to say, okay, you know what? There are bigger problems than our ideological differences, right? There are bigger threats to the community, and we have to be able to collaborate at least on those things that we all agree on, and at least on those things where our organizations have shared mission and shared goals. So that's largely the panel. There is one thing I want to plug for everybody as something to please keep your eye out on. If we're going to talk about a future of an Iranian American community and one which is well established and well organized, I've sort of been speaking about this pretty much everywhere I go of late, but we really have to think about what attorneys know as a legal defense fund. Right? An LDF is typically a fund that's created. You guys can go back, like the NAACP has one. There's MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense Fund. There's every community that reaches a certain level of sophistication and assimilation in this country develops what's called a legal defense fund. And a legal defense fund is effectively an organization that brings in-house all the things that we're talking about. It brings in-house the ability to advocate, to lobby, to do impact litigation, to do community service, and the ability to not only raise money for those purposes, but then to give money to organizations that are also doing that work. But what's critical about a legal defense fund is that it is not necessarily, although it can serve that purpose, it's not necessarily an acute response organization. It doesn't wait for a travel ban to respond, but it thinks proactively. What is it that we need? What lawsuit should we be looking for to change a particular law? What laws do we need to pass, and how do we start lobbying? How do we start advocating? And that systemic, proactive approach is really what has allowed the NAACP to go through Jim Crow laws and to go through the slew of discrimination that probably still have civil rights and get to where they are today. Same with MALDEF, same with numerous other organizations. So I think that's one thing that our community has to work towards, and I think it's something that everyone will have to chip in on, right? So to think about the types of, you need an endowment, $20 million endowment in order to be able to do this long term, and that's not something that's going to be raised in one organization or another or in 10 of them, right? That's something that's going to have to be raised across the country, and that's the type of stuff that we need to be able to agree that we can collaborate on if we want to support the community. And so organizations up here are working on that. There's groundwork already being laid for it, and we just keep your eyes open and please keep engaged when it comes around. Thank you all for coming.